Here's what I got now. This is the original air box that came with the backseat heater kit. It's made out of steel and it was pretty rusty. I sandblasted it all clean, but I couldn't get the inside corners there clean. I sandblasted and blasted and blasted and I couldn't get down in some of those corners. Kind of a butterfly valve in there. It had some kind of a fabric in it to seal it, and that burned up. It just disintegrated and burned up, and so it doesn't close off all the way. The only way for me to fix that would be to disassemble this, to cut this off on this end and then unrivet that valve in there and try to put some more stuff in it. But because it's steel, it's just going to rust again. It's heavy. This is a piece of box tubing, so that thing weighs over a pound, I'd say. But because it's steel and it'll rust, and I'd have to disassemble it to get that butterfly fixed in there and then have to weld it back together, I decided to replace this with a stainless steel one. And I'd ordered one from F. Atlee Dodge in Anchorage year before last when I was up there. They told me it would cost about $450 or so and take about 3 months to get it. I left my name and address and phone number and everything, and they never did get back to me with a new box. So anyway, I've taken it on myself to go ahead and design a new box. I also changed some things. We've got the 2-inch inlet here that comes out of the muffler, or the muffler shroud, the air coming in, and then this had a 2-inch outlet on it with 2-inch tube that went down to an outlet in the cabin. But I wanted to route that underneath the floor in the cabin and have it come out more directly in the back seat rather than on the leg of the pilot, or right there on your hip. 2-inch tubing wouldn't clear underneath between the floorboards and the fabric of the airplane and the bottom of the airplane. Doing some experimenting, I found that I could get 1-inch scat tubing to fit. So that's what I run in the airplane. I made a little outlet that goes underneath the front seat, and I can run scat tube so it comes out directly on the back seat. Since I had that, I decided I would run a 1-inch outlet on the box and still maintain a 2-inch inlet here, so we can maintain that portion of the kit. This will go through the firewall, hook a scat tube onto that, and we'll have hot air coming in, and then we've got a valve here that closes that off pretty good. That seals that up pretty good, and a 1-inch outlet down at the bottom, which will run right into that scat tube to go down into the back seat. But I did look for some stainless steel box tube, figuring that would be easier to fabricate something with that, but I couldn't find anything of a reasonable size. I think the smallest I could get was like 18 gauge. I happen to have a sheet of this. It's either 22 or 24 gauge. I folded it up into boxes, and I got some 18 gauge stainless steel 1-inch tubing and some 18-inch gauge 2-inch stainless steel tubing. And then I had some 20 gauge 316 stainless steel flat stock that I used for the faceplate on this. So it's dimensionally smaller than this other box. It's the same outside dimension, the same periphery dimension, but it's a little bit shorter. It's lighter, of course, because it's all 20 gauge steel, or 22 gauge steel and 20 gauge steel instead of whatever that stuff is. So it's a lot lighter. Well, this is my last attempt at a control box. I tried a little bit of TIG brazing because I got some 3/32 silicon bronze rod here some time back, and I thought I'd try that. Of course, it was just too big for what I want to do here, so I ordered some 16th silicone bronze rod, and I just made my first bead in there on that, and that looks like it's going to work out really nice. So far it's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Well, here's my first one done in the silicone bronze, and I really like the way that turned out. My first weld, my first braze weld, whatever you want to call it, was this one here on this face, and even though I had this tube here, this outlet here in the way, it went really well. I mean, just almost textbook, just like the videos. My second side here didn't go so well, and I wound up putting a lot more filler in there, and I don't know what was going on that. I don't know whether I was getting it too hot or what, but it just wasn't flowing right, and it started out bad, and it just didn't get any better as I went along. My third side went just about perfect. I mean, it just went right along. I'm really happy with that. Really happy with that. Keeping with the brazing theme, I brazed on my pivot points here, my bushings on there. So I've got this one rolled over, and I brazed on those little, it's a 1/4-inch stainless steel tube. Any concerns that I had about this brazing not being strong enough for this, not holding up, was pretty much alleviated when I put this together. This aluminum rod got stuck in there too, and I took a pair of pliers and twisted on this and got it twisting and twisted all directions, and to the point where it finally broke this aluminum rod off. I used this as a little bench anvil. This is the plug that I'd made to go in those 2-inch holes. It's got a hole through the center, and took a punch and my hammer and drove that rod out. Well, these things never quivered. Bend on here that I made didn't come undone. There's no bend in this valve here, this piece of metal. But the main thing is that those brazes there, those welds, they never flinched from driving that out for all the pressure I put on it. So that alleviates any concern that brazing might not be strong enough to hold up for this. Well, this is the prototype here. I drilled those holes in there for that shaft, and then decided I wanted something on there for a pivot point, or for the pivot point on there, to keep that from wearing out, and just that thin sheet metal as it vibrates and moves around. I got some stainless steel washers and just tacked on there on both points and give it a little wear service. But I'm thinking maybe what I'm going to do here, I've already got brazing on here, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to braze on a little pad right in here of that silicone bronze, and then drill these holes out with that, and that'll give me a stronger pivot point, something a little thicker than just the standard sheet metal on here. Well, I took some of that silicone bronze rod and I built up a little patch here and another little patch here on the bottom, and there's no purpose for those except for a bearing surface for that shaft for the valve. I'm going to take that down the drill press and drill out the holes for the rods there and get this valve mounted in there. Well, I'm pretty happy with the way this second box that I made came out. This is the one with the brazed end on it, and I brazed the butterfly in there, the pivot points on the butterfly, and then made the actuating arm here and just welded it on. But I went ahead and put some of that brazing rod here on the box on both sides for a bearing surface instead of welding on those washers like I did the other one. And then, except for a couple spots here where there were gaps, a little bit of gaps in here in the metal, where I had to add some filler rod, I got a pretty nice weld around there. That valve closes tight in there against that sheet metal. But since I'd already had plans for 2 more of these, I already had the blanks for 2 more of these, I decided to go ahead and finish them off too. I can use the practice, and these are not too bad of boxes. My last 2 boxes, I got the valves put in them. Getting better and better on this all the time, but these are all good enough, so it's time to quit, because good enough is good enough. Don't have to be perfect, but that valve fits tight, and it's got just a little bit of tension in it where it brushes up against this face here when it turns, which is good. It keeps it from vibrating and stuff, and but it closes up tight. Got my bronze bushing there, bearing surface, and got a real nice weld inside in there on that shaft and the valve body, the valve itself. So that one turned out good. This one is just as good. The valve turned out really good. It's got, again, just a little bit of tension on it as it turns, so it doesn't vibrate too much. It seals up tight. I'm finished with the backseat heater air control box experiment here. I've got 4 of them. All of them are satisfactory, but there's some that are better than others. This is my first prototype. This was the first one that I put together totally. Figured out the valve in there. And this one actually turned out halfway decent, but I decided to go ahead and keep trying. And this one is the same generation as this one, as far as the flange and everything is concerned on it. I did a little better job welding it, still not perfect. I changed the geometry a little bit on the valve. I put it a little closer to the front here so it seals up a little better in here, but otherwise it's the same thing. Oh, and then I took some silicone bronze and built up some silicone bronze on this sheet metal here for a wear point on these pins instead of putting the stainless steel washers on there. So anyway, that one works pretty good, but these first ones that I did, the flanges on them here are a little bit small. They're usable. I can put holes in here and have room to put nuts on there to mount it on the firewall, but it's a little bit tight on there. The 2-inch tube, I stuck those through a little bit too far. Autogenously welding them, it worked out really well, but I stuck those through about 1/32 of an inch, so the bead on those stuck out quite a bit. Well, as I practiced and got more experience with that, I realized that I didn't have to stick those tubes through there. I could just run them almost flush with these, the metal that was being welded into, and the welds would still turn out good, but they're almost flush, or they are flush in there with the inside of the sheet metal. So I made up some new ones, and I made up these flanges a little bit bigger, so they've got more room on them on the outside here. So they stick out, they're just a little bit wider, so it'll be a little better on there. This box is pretty much the same as this one except for the wider flange, and I did a lot better on the weld here. The welds here are still a little bigger than I would like, but they're not too bad. So this one is really nice. This one turned out real well, real good. So my fourth one, I tried something a little different. I got some 16th silicone bronze rod and I brazed this one on, and that turned out really nice. So this one, I really like it. It turned out real good. And the same thing, it's almost identical to this one. The flange is bigger. The butterfly works real well. And so this one's really nice. So I'm going to send these down to my mechanic to have them inspected and get his seal of approval on them. Then I'm pretty sure that I'll probably put this one in the airplane, and I want to do that before I put the boot cowl on the airplane, which I have to put the boot cowl on before I can finish fitting the windshield, and I have to do that before I put the wings on. So we'll get this off in the mail here and get it approved by the mechanic,